Welcome back to On Point. The conflict in the Middle East has been eating up the headlines in recent weeks, and for good reason. But this conflict is nothing new. The root of the tension is who gets what land and how it's controlled. This brings us to today. The violence was sparked by the murder of 3 Israeli students, followed by the burning of a 16-year-old Palestinian boy by Israeli extremists. This opened the floodgates, and here we are with an ongoing crisis on our hands. The death toll is mounting, especially on the Palestinian side. Now, this issue is controversial and emotionally charged on both sides. And here at On Point, we want to bring you a balanced approach. With that said, joining me now to tackle this tough issue is Speaker for Israeli Advocacy, Tibi Zohar, and human rights activist Mo Diab. Thank you guys so much for being here. And I want to start off by talking about these settlements. And Mo, I want to toss it to you first. If Israel stopped settling this area, would the problem be somewhat solved? Would peace talks be able to continue? What do you think?
Absolutely. In the past several years, the United Nations General Assembly security members have all voted and clearly stated that the biggest obstacle to a long-lasting peace resolution is the construction of the Jewish settlements in occupied Palestinian land. So during the last round of peace talks, Israel continued building settlements in the occupied Palestinian land. There are over 500,000 Jewish settlers living in occupied Palestinian land, which has already been voted to be a sovereign Palestinian state. So the talks have not been taken seriously, given that the construction of the settlements continues and the populating of the Palestinian state continues with Jewish settlers.
You know, I can certainly understand this, but Tibi, I want to give you a chance to respond to that as well. So why is Israel seem to be settling this area? Is there a reason for it?
Well, first and foremost, I'm happy that my fellow here cited the United Nations. It's the same United Nations that voted to divide the country in 1948 between two peoples. And obviously, you know, Israel, Jews, accepted that. They had no choice. That's what they've been given. They had nothing else. Even though the Arabs had 22 states.
And Israel only has 1 state, which is fair to mention.
Yep, and unfortunately, they did not accept it then. Not only did they not accept, they move in on the 600,000 Jews with 6 armies, and the Arabs, Palestinians were not existent there at that point, but the Arabs were double, with 1 million too. And so now when we cite the United Nations, when it's convenient for us, sometimes it's convenient and sometimes it's not. The question is not what happens with the settlements. The question is, why can Israel have 20% of its population Arab living and participating, and the Palestinian Authority or state cannot have 200,000 Jews in it? Why do they need to be Jew-rein, Jew-clean? What is this ethnic cleansing atmosphere? How do you start a state this way? I don't understand that.
I think on both sides there's been charges of ethnic cleansing. So, Mo, I want to turn that to you. What's your response to what he said? Does Israel have a right to feel threatened? I mean, I think both sides probably have a right to feel threatened, but what do you make of it?
I think it's very important to approach the fact starting from the inception of the Jewish state. Starting from the beginning, Palestine was a sovereign nation. Palestine has generations and generations of families, culture, and lifestyle there. And I don't think anyone can question that. And occupying power came in. It wasn't a military. It was the Zionist movement. It was a militia. It was a movement that wanted to create its own state. They went into a nation. They massacred hundreds of thousands. They displaced 750,000 Palestinians in their own nation. So saying why can't they be in the new Palestinian state, the settlements, the freezing of the settlements is a point for the peace talks to discuss. It shows that the Israeli side does not have good faith intentions in the actual peace talks. So that question really, it's a mainstream media rhetoric that's always saying ethnically cleansing, and it's making the Israeli side as the victims in this. And I really feel that pointing out the fact that the Palestinian state is going from a Palestinian nation and the land is shrinking. So the idea that Israel has been a nation for thousands of years is really misleading the public. It's been 66 years. It was a forced inception. It was a colonizing power. And to this day, there are Palestinians who were born there that cannot go back to their homes, that cannot live there, that cannot get citizenship there. But if you are Jewish anywhere in the world, regardless of your nationality, you have the right to return. The Palestinians do not have the right to return. Where are these Palestinian refugees going to go? Almost 7 million Palestinian refugees. Where are they going to go? if they are to have the right of return under international law, under UN resolutions, they will be in the Palestinian state, which has already been agreed upon.
I'm glad you brought up the right to return, because that's been a sticking point for a lot of the peace negotiations. So I want to see, Tibi, what do you think about that, this right to return, these refugees returning to their land? Do you think that this is a valid assertion, it's a valid claim to this area?
Well, I'm really stunned by the history that I learned here.
I know I've heard various histories myself, and that's why this issue is so hard.
This is an interesting history to hear. In 1920, the Jewish population versus the Muslim population, there were no Palestinians back then. There was, of course, no government or ruling of any kind of source of Palestinians. There were no Palestinians. There were Arabs there, some of them from around and some of them indigenous, indeed. Some of them actually originate from Jews, that weren't expelled by the Romans. But that's a whole different issue. What happened was between 1945 and 1948, about 300,000 ashes from Europe, from Buchenwald, from Auschwitz, had nowhere to go. And so what
the Zionist movement there, is that what
the
we're
word Zionist
to?
is not relevant here.
Okay.
What happened was Moishele was 14 years old looking at the gate opening at Buchenwald and had no family, no home to go back to. Because Germany and Poland, anybody else, of course, they had nowhere to go. The only thing they remembered was next year in Jerusalem, next year in Jerusalem. So they had nowhere to go. So these 300, if they had come to the U.S., just like we know now on the border, no one would dispute that they need help. Well, they came in, they never asked for their Arabs for money or anything else. They doubled the population from 300,000 Jews. It doubled within 3 years to 600,000 Jews, 1 million to Arabs, 6 armies, and all of a sudden we conquered the land. Now, they didn't come with arms, they didn't come with anything. They owned nothing. They came in and they got a piece of the land from the United Nations and said, okay. And this is history, nothing else. Now, they didn't have an army for about 3 weeks since the declaration on the war. They only had a few fractions of little organizations. They formed an army, and what do you know? We beat you guys. I'm sorry. And that was not planned. Now, what happened was, indeed, there was an exchange of refugees. Arab countries expelled between 800,000 and 1 million Jews that came to Israel. Yes, within that realm, 600 to 700,000 of the Arabs, yes, they fled because they thought the Jews behaved like them. They were scared the Jews will slaughter them. That didn't happen because Jews don't do that.
Well,
and you can see that in the world right now.
It's
no question.
Very interesting narratives on both sides. So we do have conflicting history here, and I think that's been happening for decades. When we come back, though, I want to talk about the solutions. Well, you might hear the narrative that the majority of people killed in Israel's Operation Protective Edge are mostly women and children, but this is actually false. Despite what the mainstream media tells us, fact is that over 80% of the nearly 2,000 civilians killed since July were males, half of which were between 18 and 28 years old. By the way, these numbers were reported by Al Jazeera, and last time I checked, they're not exactly pro-Israel. But returning to our panel now, we got a chance to hear from Tibi about the refugees, and we want to give Mo a chance to respond to that. So Mo, take it away.
Regarding your statement saying that there essentially were no Palestinians in Palestine, I find that to be incredibly insulting. I find it to be incredibly ignorant, giving historical records. Most Israeli parliament members don't even deny this. There's a rich history in Palestine and a culture. By denying that, you are denying their existence in its very essence. Now, also saying that the Jews that from the Holocaust...
I said no Palestinians, but yes, Arabs. I didn't say they
Arabs.
They weren't called Palestinians.
Referring to Palestinians strictly as Arabs is a way to take away their actual Palestinian identity.
What I'm saying is
to normalize
Jewish Palestinians back then living in Palestine.
Yes, and Jesus was a Jewish Palestinian.
Exactly.
So by saying that there were no Palestinians, you're actually denying.
Well, in the time of Jesus, he wasn't called Palestine yet, so that is a little misconception, because when Jesus, actually that's not true, he wasn't a Palestinian, because Palestine was actually a name Roman gave after Jesus. I'm sorry. So there was no, Jesus was not a Palestinian.
Regardless
but you claim Jesus is a Palestinian, which is not,
regardless
it's not
of
unique
whether,
for you guys.
Regardless of whether we disagree
Even
or not,
I
think the statements that you made were meant to be intentionally misleading to let the public and the viewers see that there were no such thing as Palestinians there. Also, to your point with the Holocaust and the refugee population, it's important to point out that the Zionist movement pointed out dozens of locations to settle a Jewish state in Argentina, in Kenya, in Madagascar. Palestine was by no means remains their #1 destination. So the religious claims to put a Jewish state in Palestine hold no water, considering the fact that they had religious claims in Britain, in Argentina, in Kenya, and Madagascar. The reason they settled in Palestine is they were weak and defenseless. That was the only reason they settled there. To say that the Jews came in...
The Jews were weak and defenseless?
No, the Palestinians had no military.
Oh, and the Jews did.
And the Jews had militias, the Haganah. The Jews had several militias, and these militias came in throughout the years, and they would massacre villages and towns. This is actually public record, BBC Radio. You can look up something called the Village Files, which shows that these militias came in under the Zionists and actually went to village by village and massacred anyone who was a threat to the soon-to-be founded Jewish state.
How many died?
How many died?
How many were massacred?
We do
tens of thousands were massacred. 750,000 to 1 million were displaced, and it's ongoing.
Do you know how many Arabs died not of the surrounding country you call Palestinians? How many Israel or Palestine Arabs were killed in 1948?
I do want to get away. I do want to get away from the he said, she said, because we have a lot of stats and figures being thrown around. But I want to bring it back to very much so nuts and bolts, and maybe we can find some common ground is what I'm hoping for. So what I want to discuss is the solutions. So from what I've heard, we've got 3. One is the one-state solution. We erase the borders, but then we're left with what do we do with Jerusalem? 2 is a 2-state solution. Again, what do we do with the disputed boundaries? Where do we draw the lines? And 3 is just the overall destruction of one side or the other. Now, all 3 sound like very difficult and almost like between a rock and a hard place here, but I want to throw it to you guys. Are any of these solutions viable? And if not, is there one? And Mo, I want to toss it to you first, and then Tibi will give you a chance to respond.
I think there's a lot of debate about the one-state, two-state for various reasons. In April of 2014, the unity government with Fatah and Hamas, represented by Mahmoud Abbas, said that they were willing to work on a two-state solution. Now, the obstacles to a two-state solution is the continued settlement building, and Israel claims that it's going to be a demographic threat if there's a one-state solution.
Because then Jews would be the minority, correct?
Expected, not a minority. Currently, there are more Jews that are in Israel, but the numbers are starting to level out.
I do have a question for you, Mo, though, because you brought something that's very interesting to me. You mentioned the unity government, and I really want to get into this, and Tibi, I want to get your response to that as well. Is this a problem here for Israel because now they're uniting with Hamas in a way, and because Hamas doesn't recognize Israel? Is that another sticking point in peace talks? Tibi, I want to give you a chance to speak to that.
Well, first, the one-state solution was actually an Israeli idea.
Okay.
Originally. Which was fiercely unaccepted by Arabs. And you can see an
Why is that?
Well, they can't stand Jews. It's very easy. I mean,
is that fair to say?
That's absolutely unfair to say.
They just can't stand Jews. And in history, by the way, it wasn't
true. That
True.
50 to 70% of Palestinians actually side for not only a Palestinian state, around 60% side on the Jewish side for a Palestinian state. And the reason is not because they hate Jews. Really, it's this political rhetoric. It's a public discourse that is proliferating the idea of anti-Semitism, when in reality, the college kids, the young ones, all those who compose the majority, just want to live normal lives. But it's made out to be this anti-Semitism claim and the
I never
finger
said
pointing.
Anti-Semitism. I said, excuse me, I never said anti-Semitism. I said they can't stand Jews. And I have in my pocket, which is I'm not going to take out the charter of the Hamas. It's very easy to read and see they can't stand Jews. Now, they can't stand not only Jews, they can't stand others, and we can see how they're butchered and slaughtered all over the Middle East now. Christians are in the same boat.
Members of Jewish parliament openly state that they're going to ethnically cleanse Gaza.
That's fine. They can state whatever they want. The question is what you do.
These are elected representatives,
and
you are speaking on behalf of those who are democratically elected. Democratically elected, U.S. supported.
Declaration versus the Hamas.
It's very hypocritical for you to say that. It's unbelievably hypocritical.
You really don't want me to do that.
I do want to discuss this as well. I know this is very emotionally charged, so I want to kind of bring it back a little bit, but I do have to ask you. I want to talk about not necessarily Palestine, but Hamas. What does Hamas really want? Because you bring up the charter, you bring up, the covenant of Hamas, and it mentioning the obliteration of Jews. Is this fair to say?
I want to mention that this morning, while I was working out, I watched CNN.
Okay.
On CNN, the representative of the PLO, or the Palestinian Authority,
right.
Okay, not the Hamas, from Egypt, was approached by the CNN anchor, and I don't remember who it was, and was asked 6 or 7 times, because we in America cannot accept no solution. So he was asked, why can't you tell the Hamas that to get off their tree and not start again tomorrow, and maybe because you guys agreed to it? And he said, no, we don't. We're one unity. And he said, but of course, Americans cannot, of course, tie the two and say Hamas is the same. So he 6 times he tried to give him an out and say, you're not like Hamas. Are you? Are you not like Hamas? He wouldn't. He said, listen, we're the same, and we both agree.
I want to ask him, I want to give Mo a chance to respond to that. Is Hamas and Palestine, there is a unity government. Are they one and the same? I want to give you a chance to respond.
First of all, I want to say that either one doesn't completely represent the majority of the people. However, in Gaza, Hamas is the democratically elected government. In the past, they were recognized as a terrorist organization by the United States, by Canada, and by members of the European Union. But in the actual vote for an independent Palestinian state, including the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, there were 138 UN member states that voted for a state, which means they recognize them as a legitimate democratically elected government.
Hamas is not.
Yes,
Hamas is not.
It was a U.S. proctored election in 2006.
I do have to ask you though, do you consider Hamas to be a terrorist network?
I feel that my actual opinion on the matter of whether I consider them a terrorist network or not isn't relevant. I feel that what they do for the people is relevant. When they were democratically elected, they built hospitals, they built schools, universities, and they brought aid into Gaza. Now, if you look at
to condemn Hamas for what they do to your people, not to mine.
I will condemn any murder. I will condemn any civilian casualties.
No, that's not the.
I am speaking across the board.
The United States.
I am against any kind of violent murder targeting civilians, like the 2,000 civilians that were actually targeted with precision warfare in Gaza. I will admit all murder of innocent is wrong. Avoiding any kind of casualty is essential.
What they do to your people, not
Explain to me what they do to my people.
Okay, so first I'd like to address one thing that Americans have a tendency to hear and not understand. When my fellow here says the majority, there's not one Arab country that's ruled by the majority. Not one. There's a reason for that. The majority is irrelevant. For Germany, the majority was not Hitler, but it was irrelevant. They still caused huge devastation in the world. Forget the Jews. So the majority doesn't matter here. By the way, the real elected one
Israel's
is
a democracy, proclaimed democracy, and you're saying that the majority doesn't matter? So a democracy, the majority does matter in a democracy. Let's remember the definition of this.
Hamas was elected democratically, I remind you. Of course, there was no other election since, because that's how it happened.
Can you just stick to the point? What did they do to the people?
I do want to ask you guys, because there's a tit for tat.
They shot 20. They executed 20 last week.
Israel executed 2,490 children. Israel massacred Palestinian children.
We need to bring it back. Because there's definitely a back and forth. And obviously, this is why peace talks have fallen apart before. But I want to get away from that. Final thoughts. I'm going to give both of you guys, and please don't interrupt each other. Tibi, I'm going to start with you, and Mo, I'm going to let you finish it off. I want to ask you, in your mind, very concisely, is there a solution here? If so, what is it? Your turn.
In the foreseeable future, there is no solution at this point.
Okay.
There is no solution because sometimes you have such a gap in cultural debate.
It's understandable.
That you just can't bridge. And the narrative, when you see the children in the territories which are disputed, not occupied. When you see what they're fed, excuse me, children on both sides are not fed the same food and the same. They're not taught the same things, and you can see that very much.
There's definitely a cultural division.
It's easy to Google children of Gaza and then children of Israel, women of Gaza, women of Israel. Just, ladies and gentlemen, Google that. It's easy. You'll see. Go through the images. You'll see what I'm talking about. So that can't be bridged at this point. Unfortunately, maybe at some point.
We all hope at some point.
They'd like to have a state more than they'd like to kill Jews.
To clarify from you right now, you don't see in the foreseeable future, because of the cultural divisions, you don't see peace in the foreseeable future. Now, Mo, I'm going to let you wrap it up. You're the last word on this, and I want to ask you, do you see a solution? If so, what is it?
Absolutely. I think the Palestinians have compromised time and time again when it comes time for the peace talks and negotiating terms. Going all the way back to the Oslo Accords, I mean, there was a two-state solution. It was a viable state. However, every time we come to the table for the peace talks, they're compromising more. So an actual solution, if a two-state solution was something that was taken seriously, they would need to remove the siege on Gaza. allow the strangulation of the people to stop, allow them to rebuild their infrastructure, allow them to rebuild the hospitals, allow them to have a thriving economy, instead of allowing it to build up and then having these strikes against it, causing $5 billion of damage to the most densely populated area in the world, one of the most densely, 1.8 million people. So the most important thing is allowing them to survive, and it takes both sides to do this, but the siege has to be removed, and Gaza has to be able to run its own airspace, its water, and its territories for it to be a sovereign state.
So it sounds like it comes down to settlements for those on the Palestinian side. That's a major sticking point.
There can't be peace without justice first.
Okay, I want to leave it at that, and we hope that we can, hopefully peace is in the future, because this crisis is good for no one.